Hello, my name is Caden Stockwell, and I am a Ph.D. student at the University of Virginia, studying developmental psychology in the Jaswal lab. And the research I'll be presenting today builds off previous work I've done investigating the stigmatization of autistic college students. Social behavior has been found to influence stigma, such that individuals who are perceived as interacting in ways associated with autism are more stigmatized. And additionally, in a previous study, I found that special interests, which are highly focused interests and knowledge in a specific topic, may not impact the level of stigmatization directed at college students who interact in perceivably autistic-associated ways. But in non-autistic people, having a special interest is associated with relatively greater stigmatization. And one method of measuring stigma is the social distance scale. Given that research has found different people prefer different interaction partners in different social situations, examining the different scenarios used by the social distance scale may provide insight in how stigmatization varies or is similar in different activities. And so our research question was, how do non-autistic college students' preferences for interacting with autistic and with non-autistic peers differ in various hypothetical social activities? Our participants were 324 non-autistic college students from 2 universities. We wrote 6 vignettes where social behavior and special interests were manipulated, and importantly, vignette characters were not labeled as autistic or as non-autistic, so inferences and choices were made on the basis of the behaviors described in the vignettes. And all participants were exposed to all vignettes, and you can see 2 examples of the autistic vignettes here, though I'll note that participants read vignettes that were not underlined. And to answer our research question, we adapted the social distance scale into a forced choice paradigm. And so participants had to choose which of 2 vignette characters they would prefer to interact with in each of the 13 hypothetical social activities from the social distance scale. And non-parametric tests were conducted, and a Bonferroni correction was calculated due to the number of post-hoc comparisons. And so before we get to these exemplar figures, let me go over some overall findings. Autistic characters were less frequently selected when the alternative choice was a non-autistic character. In fact, when choosing between doing or attending a hypothetical social activity with either an autistic or a non-autistic character, participants selected an autistic character on average only 7% of the time. And so when looking at character selection patterns in 13 social activities, presence of a special interest influenced participant choices when selecting between non-autistic characters in almost all of the social activities, compared to in just under half of the social activities when selecting between autistic characters. And so to illustrate these results, the 2 figures on the left show comparisons between non-autistic characters, and the 2 figures on the right show comparisons between autistic characters. And the 2 graphs on the top show responses to asking participants, "You're going to take a class. Who would you prefer to take a class with?" And the 2 graphs on the bottom show responses to asking participants, "You were going to a social event such as a group dinner. Who would you prefer to go with?" And on the y-axis of all of these figures, we have how often the character of interest was selected out of the number of times they were an option displayed as a percentage. And we can see that there are essentially 2 patterns of responding, one where special interest matters, as seen in these 3 figures, and one where special interest isn't differentiating, as seen here. And so non-autistic characters without a special interest are more often selected than non-autistic characters with a special interest. And when comparing non-autistic characters, this selection pattern is significant in 12 of the 13 social activities. And when looking at choices between autistic characters, we see that in more than half of the activities, for example, the class scenario here, that characters are selected similarly, that presence of a special interest isn't associated with a reduction in selection by non-autistic participants. And in 6 scenarios, we see the same selection pattern as we see in choices between non-autistic characters, that those without a special interest are more often selected than those who have a special interest. And as for similarities and differences between common and uncommon special interest topics, I have some idea of the story the statistics are telling, but we're still checking a few things, so I'm not quite ready to share those results yet. But I think that these findings have some interesting implications. In my past work, I've discussed the relevance of the responses to non-autistic vignette characters and the relevance to autistic people who may use masking or camouflaging strategies and who are regularly perceived as being non-autistic. And for this group, like people who are indeed non-autistic, talking about a special interest may still be somewhat stigmatized. And while perceivably autistic people who talk about special interests may not be more stigmatized overall than those who don't, when looking at individual social activities like we have here, talking about a special interest may be associated with a reduced preference for interaction in some scenarios. An important caveat, though, is that this is specifically when the choice is between two perceivably autistic people, and this may be less common of a scenario in many college settings. And so I think, like most autism stigma-related work should do, these results spark the question, how do we prepare non-autistic people to think and to act more inclusively towards those who are different from them? So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to visit my poster. Feel free to email me with questions or comments at ks6hv@virginia.edu, or you can talk to me on Twitter. My handle is @CadenStockwell. Thank you very much.